Hi, I'm Jonathan Block. In this video, I'll be doing Mellotronics, which is what I call sound-on-sound looping Frippertronics style, using a Boss RE-202 Space Echo and the modern digital Mellotron. The signal chain is the Mellotron M4000D Mini. Its master mono analog output goes into a Boss volume pedal I have on the floor. The output from the volume pedal goes into a JHS Mini AB switch, just so I can switch back and forth between instruments, but I'll just be using the Mellotron for this jam. The output from that pedal goes into the Boss GT1000core multi-effects, and the stereo output from the multi-effects goes into the Boss RE-202 Space Echo. The output from the Space Echo goes into a Universal Audio Volt 276 interface that communicates back and forth with the iPad Pro. Not really showing anything on the iPad today. It's a hardware-only jam. I'll be recording everything within GarageBand. Link in the description down below to a video where I just outline and go through how I use GarageBand just as kind of a modern digital tape recorder. First thing that you have to do is get the Boss RE-202 in long delay mode. That's what enables you to do the sound-on-sound looping. And you can get up to a 6-second delay out of the RE-202. Again, down in the description below, I will have a link to a video where I go in depth into doing this with the Mellotron. So setting up the RE-202 in that long delay mode of 6 seconds, and then everything to kind of do a sound-on-sound looping jam and an explanation and an improv around that. So I'm not going to spend too much time. I already have this in long delay mode. I'll put a little description down below too of how to get it in that mode if you don't want to watch that video. So we'll be using sounds today just from the Mellotron M300, which was released in the early 70s after the Mark II and before the more portable M400, so kind of fell between the two most famous Mellotrons and wasn't really available for that long as far as I can recall. There's only 6 sounds that come resident on the sound card in the stock M400D Mellotron series. You can buy additional cards that have more of the sounds, but like most Mellotrons, a lot of the tapes were reused between different models, so you still get pretty much the full library of examples of sounds, even though, particularly for the M300, there's only 6 of them. So we've got 4 strings, and we've got a vibraphone and a clarinet. Let me go through all of those kind of without any effects, just so you can hear what they sound like. Well, it's not fair to say without any effects. The main effects I'm not going to have on, but within the patches that I have for the Mellotron on the GT1000core, I have a little bit of reverb and a little bit of compression, so you'll definitely hear the reverb. All right, let's get started. Just walking through the sounds quickly. This is called Strings A High. You can hear that reverb when I lift off. Then we've got Strings A Low. Now let's add those two together, low and high, just so we can see what that sounds like. All right, then from Strings A Low, we go to Strings B High. Hear that reverb again. Strings B Low. And then we go slow vibraphone. It's a vibraphone. I think they mean the vibrato is slow. So I'll be using effects on this one and fading it in. I'll demonstrate that shortly. Hear that reverb again. And then clarinet. All right, let's start back at the beginning and just add some effects. I'm not going to be using a lot of effects in this, and actually, I won't be using any effects on the strings. I want that real string sound to come through. So, having said that, when I get to the structure, I may use a little teeny bit as I use the strings as a solo instrument and maybe put some delay on that. But let's get to the vibraphone because I will be using part of this for the loop. The clarinet will be really the solo instrument, although that'll add to the loop too. So we've got 3 effects here. Let me go to the strings, actually the clarinet, so I can demonstrate them. And apologies, I say this every video, but I cannot, no matter how I set this up or readjust the camera, I can't get the screen on the GT1000core multi-effects to show up on the camera, so I just have to walk through. I've got 3 effects. I've got a rotary, which is the blue color. I've got a phaser, which is the green color, and then a delay, which is the red. And of course, I've got a little bit of compression going. I also have the reverb going, and I believe I probably take a little bit off the bass just to get rid of the boominess. So let's demonstrate the effects first with the clarinet. I think it's easier that way. So this is the rotary. It's subtle. Phaser. I rarely use effects like modulation that are really over the top because I still consider myself mainly a bass player. With effects, I have to have some of that clean signal in here. The great thing about multi-effects, besides, you know, the Boss, I mean, the sounds are amazing, is that you really have a lot of control over the wet dry, but separately. You have a separate mix knob for the dry and a separate mix knob for the wet. So you really can kind of go across the gamut of how deep and rich an effect is, particularly like phaser. Again, I'm just trying to add a little bit, not call attention to the effect so much, I guess. And then delay. Oops. I believe I have a tape delay set up for this, which is why you get a little bit of that modulation at the end. Speaking of modulation and interesting sounds, there is one thing I want to talk about. I've covered this in other videos because the Mellotron, so not this Mellotron, but the original Mellotron that folks remind me all the time that this is not the original Mellotron. I'm aware of that. I've played original Mellotrons. I have no desire to deal with tapes or weight anymore. Anyways, if you didn't know, the Mellotron, each individual string was actually one tape loop. So to make the tape loop, they had to record each individual note. And what you get, because it was a person actually playing, is a lot of idiosyncrasies. And sometimes they're really pronounced. Either way, they're cool. My point in saying all this is that I did notice a cool one. And it's all random. It just depends on the note. So F sharp on strings A high, you can hear the person almost hits 2 notes at one, and you can hear some cool modulation. So, yep. Okay, you get the idea. So we've gone through all the effects now. The setup is gonna be. Let me just do a sample loop here. Again, I'm not going to use any effects other than a little bit of the compression and the reverb for the original strings loop. So I'm going to do a really, really quick short loop, and then I'll get into the jam. Go to the next sound. Doing 2 notes for this sample here. When I'm doing the jam, it'll be 3 notes per instrument. In the interest of time, I'm just going to stop here. Okay, and then I can do a solo with the clarinet over it. Disengaged the RE-202 so this doesn't get added to the loop. Maybe add a little of the delay in. And then with the volume pedal on the floor, as the loop kind of fades out over time, I can adjust the volume so it's not overpowering. So I'll be doing that. Then we'll fade this loop out a little. We'll bring in a little of the vibraphone. We'll use effects for that. Let me just bring a few of those in. And actually, it's a quieter instrument, so I'll turn up the volume a little. Turn that back up. Some phaser. Now I put that on low just to get a different sound, but it gets a little lost, so I may not do that during the jam. Then I can put some clarinet over that. So over time, like any sound-on-sound looping, the sound degrades. I keep the intensity knob, which controls the repeats, at about 130. That gives the least amount of degradation, and the volume decreases very slowly, but there's no way around that. This is not designed or advertised as a sound-on-sound looper. I just read that you can get 6 seconds of delay out of it and wanted to give it a try, and I love the idiosyncrasies about it. It definitely has a nice, you can hear it already, as it kind of fades and starts becoming more mid-rangey, more hollow. All right, let me fade this out here, and I'm just gonna reset everything and I'll do the jam. I'll let that fade out a bit. You can hear how the low end and the high end are disappearing, and there's more of an emphasis on that woody mid-range sound. Definitely a quality that you're only going to get with the RE-202 Space Echo for sound-on-sound looping. So if you don't like that sound, don't bother with this one. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and good luck with your own music.